Joining me right now is Paul Ingrassia. Paul, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's always a pleasure. I love being on this podcast.
So do I.
One of my favorites.
It is good. It's a good one.
Yes.
So you're involved in a lot of things, obviously. Everyone follows you on social media.
Yep.
You're all over the place figuring out what's going on. Let's start with the trial of President Trump. He was convicted a couple of weeks ago. And now everybody sort of wants to, tragically, now everybody wants to know what happens between now and the sentencing date of July 11th. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about the appeal process and what kind of could come in the next couple
Well,
weeks?
I mean, the appeal process, New York State appeals process, is as convoluted as the trial itself and the law.
Intentionally.
I mean, listen, this was a mix and match verdict where the judge basically told the jurors, here's a we're calling it a smorgasbord of options, very New York. And, you could indict him or you could convict him on a federal election a FICA violation, which is a violation under the Federal Election Commission under federal law. Why is that in state court? That's a whole separate issue. Tax violation or a bookkeeping violation. So it's a very circular sort of legal verdict that they came up with, the judge. We don't have any transparency into the process. It is rife for review by a higher court. Now, will Trump's attorneys appeal this within the New York State, court system, or will he go directly to higher authority, potentially federal court system, and specifically the Supreme Court? That's really the main question here. Obviously, President Trump has been pretty vocal and no holds barred in where he wants this decision to be appealed to. He's called for Supreme Court intervention, and we could talk a little bit more about that. But listen, we have less than a month to go before the July 11th sentencing. Now, will he be put on house arrest? Will they actually put him in Rikers Island? I mean, this judge is extremely crazy, Matt.
He really could.
And we talked about this already, but this judge is an unhinged liberal, and he's definitely out there with a vengeance to, take President Trump off the election campaign trails as much as possible.
Now, I hear so many people that say, at this point, there's no way he's going to really put him in jail, right? That's sort of like people trying to comfort themselves into thinking it. But since it's gotten to this point,
I know.
that sort of says, why would they stop, right?
Well, I was actually just with Jim Jordan, Congressman Jordan, in D.C. this past week. And he said just that. He said, it was unthinkable, it was unprecedented that they'd ever raid a president's home, Mar-a-Lago, until it happened.
Right.
It's unprecedented that they'd, bring a president, leading, I don't say former president, we say president.
That was made up for him.
Into court on trial as a bald-faced act of election interference, and yet they did it, and then they convicted him. That was unprecedented. So, taking the third and final step, putting him in jail, I mean, I would not rule that out as a possibility. That's basically,
it's
realistic.
It's unfortunately realistic at this point, as horrible as it is. Why would they stop at this point, right?
It's true. I mean, New York State criminal justice system is the worst of the country. The lawfare, there's a reason why much of the lawfare is concentrated in New York and Manhattan specifically, with the radical DA and Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, we know how much beauty she is, and of course, Kathy Hochul, but they're all ultimately acting out the marching orders of Joe Biden and Merrick Garland.
So you mentioned you were with Jim Jordan, Congressman Jim Jordan. What else did you take away from your time in D.C. the last couple of days? President Trump was just there sort of game planning what a potential next couple months and presidency would look like. What did you take away from his meeting there?
Well, they're planning a special congressional session the day after the sentencing, so on July 12th, where they're going to bring down both Bragg and Fani Willis to be subpoenaed. So that was kind of the strategy session that they're discussing potentially is something that they're in the works of considering. But, I raised the question. I asked him, I said, Congressman Jordan, are there any plans by Congress to help this appeals process? Are there any plans to appeal directly to the Supreme Court? There's a very special emergency motion in the law called a habeas motion, or a habeas appeal. So that's basically a possibility for President Trump's lawyers in this case. I mean, there are so many federal issues here. There are First Amendment issues. It sounds like fireworks are going off. Yeah, First Amendment issues, Sixth Amendment issues. So this is a case that should never have appeared in state court in the first place.
Sure.
So on those grounds alone, the Supreme Court can take up this issue. It's just a matter of, there are plenty of politics also to be considered here.
Right.
We have a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. 3 of those judges were appointed by President Trump himself. So we're hoping that, if there is a direct appeal to the Supreme Court, and if that is the strategy that Todd Blanche and Trump's legal team pursues, then they'll take up this case as an emergency motion.
Now, so much emphasis is on the timeline right now because we're within weeks. You mentioned the day after the sentencing, there will be things going on in terms of the legal side, but the convention is also July 15th.
Exactly. It's all by design.
Obviously by design, but even within the party, I know some have suggested maybe moving the convention up. I don't know if that's really a possibility, but how does that throw a wrinkle into the convention process as well?
Well, it throws a major wrench into the whole process because, listen, if he's sentenced that day and whatever the judge comes up with, it seems like if he wakes up in a good mood or if he's in a bad mood, you'll get one sentencing or another. Maybe he'll put him. But even if he puts Trump on house arrest, that would be an issue.
Sure.
I mean, he's not going to be able to appear in person at the convention, which is scheduled to be, as you said, 3 days later in Milwaukee. So, I don't know. We still are kind of in the dark as to how this appeals process will work out. If they appeal before the sentencing date, the judge has a lot of discretion under state law on what he can do. So honestly, looking at this from a legal perspective, I don't see really any way out for President Trump, given the timeline for his lawyers, unless they appeal to the Supreme Court.
Now, in spite of all of this, he's his usual self. He's all over the map. He's visiting everywhere in the country. I don't think he sleeps. You were just out in Nevada for that rally last week with him. I heard it was 100 degrees, no teleprompts, and he spoke for about an hour and a half. Tell us what you saw at the rally.
Well, it was 105 degrees, but tens of thousands of people showed up there. It was over 20,000 at least, and I think it was more because there's a line. They had to close off the park, as they usually have to do with all these rallies, because there's so many people in attendance. They jam-pack it, but he was in great spirit. He was obviously unfazed by this latest news. I think he's mobilized and galvanized and emboldened by it. Nevada is a state that a Republican has not won in 20 years, and yet he's doing so well in the polls there. He's up by between 6, 10, 12 points in a former blue Democratic state. During the rally, which the teleprompter actually broke down midway through, actually in the beginning. So he kind of was just freewheeling the whole time. He was rallying against electric vehicles and electric boats. He revealed a new policy, which was to not tax tips for hospitality workers, for waiters. Yeah, it was perfect. It was perfect for that Nevada crowd. They really ate that up, and he was firing on all cylinders. He was in a great mood, great spirit. He's not being deterred by this lawfare against him, and he is absolutely confident that obviously the people are on his side, and if the people are on his side, that'll help carry him to the White House. And then once he's in there, it's game on. He's going to clean out all these administrative agencies, especially the Department of Justice and FBI, and hopefully holds accountable the players behind it, like Merrick Garland and ultimately Joe Biden.
Now, I want to ask you about this whole obsession, even from right-wing media recently, about retribution. He goes on all these shows, and they try to put him into a corner and get him to commit to not seeking retribution. But I always sort of find that to be an odd position to put him in, because as president, he has an obligation to uphold the Constitution. And if there are bad actors in our government, that sort of falls under the role of the president to at least consider what needs to be done. What do you think about that entire narrative throughout the media right now? Is it a campaign to try to push him into a corner, or do you think it's, what do you make of it?
It's a campaign to try to make him out to be an extremist. They always try to blanket label him as a fascist, as a dictator. But, he was interviewed and he was asked this very question, Matt, by Dr. Phil.
Yes.
Recently. And he said, the greatest form of retribution for me and how I define retribution is success. We're going to be successful. We're going to bring back our economy. We're going to become energy independent again. We're going to close our border. We're going to end the weaponized Justice Department. We're going to end the wars in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, and that's really going to be retribution. He had the opportunity to lock up Hillary Clinton during the first round, and he didn't. He was very forgiving, and I think he's propelled by successful policy. He doesn't let sort of petty, vindictive hatred consume a lot of his time and thought process, because he's a productive guy. He's thinking in terms of ideas. He doesn't think in terms of prosecuting and weaponizing political enemies. That said, he's going to clean out the system of all the bad actors who are subverting the rule of law in this country, subverting due process. and our constitutional form of government. That will be an agenda number one priority. And of course, all of that includes like pardoning and releasing the J6, political hostages, and all the rest that comes with that comes along with that.
Now you mentioned, so it's always so interesting to me when they talk about how he's a crazed dictator or all those things they say about him. As you said, his first term, he didn't go after any of his political opponents. And even now you see after the primary, there was a lot of bad blood for the month and a half, 2 months that it was a primary, if there ever was one. And you're seeing him say nice things about so many of these people now. He really does a good job of sort of coming together. As soon as that's done, he kind of moves on. So in order for him to clean out a lot of the things that you're talking about, he needs to get into office. Now, you and I don't worry about the vote in terms of the people. We worry about what's gone on. We spoke with you at CPAC about the RNC overhaul. How important do you think their role will be in making sure that things are done the proper way in November?
Well, he is a unifier, to your point. He was speaking about unity when he was in D.C., and this was the first time he was in D.C. post-conviction, meeting with, several senators, actually pretty much all of them, all the high-profile ones, and Congress people. But to your point, yes, the RNC, its resources, its personnel, its lawyers will be extremely, extremely crucial. And, again, when I was meeting with a few Congress people down there, they said, listen, he has Nevada in the books, he has North Carolina, he has Georgia, he's leading in all the polls. Of course, there are issues with the elections in all those states. He has Arizona. The election will probably come down to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, one of the two. He only needs to win one. I think he's going to expand the map. Right now, he's actually tied in a state like Virginia. Which, is pretty crazy. Minnesota as well. New Jersey is within reach. But, if we want to really laser focus our resources, because we have to make sure, we get him over the finish line. We can't take any chances. We need to focus on a state like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. I mean, we're here right now in Michigan. It's great that we're doing it. This convention here, obviously the RNC will be in Wisconsin. So, but Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes on the map. It has 19 votes. It's a huge prize. And obviously, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, it's not just over. He wins in a landslide. So, we need to focus our resources, transparency, to mitigate against effects of, ballot harvesting and other sorts of shenanigans that the left likes to pull off. And we need lawyers deployed on the ground to monitor the process and to strategize beforehand. And this is all things that the RNC should be thinking about, in addition to registering voters in that state, because there's still a gulf between registered Democrats and Republicans. So you have to narrow that gulf, make sure everyone is all fresh and up to date on the voter rolls, and get them ultimately to the polls. Obviously, now we don't have election day. We have not even election week. We have election months and months and months. So, but those resources, to the extent we have limited time, limited resources, the RNC needs to entire focus on the Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt region, but really Pennsylvania is the critical prize.
I agree. Paul, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Matt. Always a pleasure as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.